Welcome back to episode 10 of the Simple Jargon podcast. My name is Alistair. That's Prometheus. And that's Peter. No, I don't usually do that kind of introduction, but hey, 10 episodes in and maybe people didn't quite know who we were. So
Mhm.
how's it going today, Peter?
It's going well. Um, um, it was just so interesting. I would like to talk about the last podcast when we talked about the dispute between Trump and Vivek, and next day, we do the podcast, and next day, Vivek quits his campaign and endorses Trump. I thought was kind of funny because it happened so quickly that I don't think so anybody expected maybe happened that quickly, especially when Vivek was talking that he's going to be there to the end. Um, given that Trump might not end up running at the end because they might find a way to somehow block him. But it was very interesting to see that, and I understand Vivek making that smart move totally. It's a calculated move because he realized that there is just at this point nobody can fight Trump. Just at this point he has so much power that this is not a time to anybody really go against the Trump. And he made calculated move, open door for himself to basically land some really good position if the Trump gets elected, in a government, and then he's going to get chance the next term if he's still interested in politics because he has many interests. So who knows where he's going to be in 4 years?
Right? Like it's one of those things where it's kind of disappointing that the conversation that we have was basically outdated before we even had the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think both of us reacted to that pretty positively. Like um, it definitely, in my estimation, incredibly smart move on Vivek's part, like that without a doubt, because at this point, it was obvious that he wasn't going to like what I guess what I would really like to know, because there's a question that I don't know the answer to, that I'd be kind of curious how it all actually works out, is how official is Vivek saying that he's suspending his campaign? How official is that?
It's
In
very
the
official.
sense
He
that
just sent an
no,
email.
no, I know, but let me just get out what I mean by official is there's like formal paperwork and those kinds of things that you need to file in order to actually start your campaign, to announce your campaign. There's official filings with Congress and those kinds of things, and I don't know what that actually looks like. But when a candidate then says it's I'm endorsing this other candidate, it's clear that I'm not going to win this election, and so I'm going to suspend my campaign. And then before the election actually happens, the person they endorse dies in a motorcycle dies in a motor vehicle accident or a plane crash, or the other party somehow removes them from the campaign, or some unforeseeable thing that removes that original person. If for some reason now Trump is unable to run, is Vivek officially unable to resume his campaign? I guess that's what my question was. I know that was a really roundabout way. That's typical of my.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing about how the technicality works. If something happened with the candidate that you endorsed, how does it affect your situation? So I guess we will find out. But one thing, and I keep thinking about a lot is, yes, I understand what's happening, and it's probably necessary for it to happen. I have lots of sadness about Vivek ending his campaign because he was probably the only candidate that was very close, expressing most of the stuff that we would like to see happen. And now him out of the race, we know that most of those things probably will not happen for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Two things. So one, just to be the optimist, the eternal optimist. If if Vivek legitimately, and it wasn't just an echo chamber that we all lived in, if he legitimately had the kind of grassroots swell and support that he seemed to have, then I think the Trump administration is smart enough to recognize that although they might not get behind all of his ideas, the ones that they would get behind, letting him stand on the pulpit speaking to the crowds about it would be a smart move because he's really,
Yes.
really good at it. So I don't expect that we're going to see the end of these really influential, awesome engagements, but I'm assuming he's going to, if he's going to work with the Trump campaign, then they're going to basically be saying like which topics he can and which ones he can't talk about. And that
Yes.
kind of concerns me a little bit because I don't like to think of him as muzzled, you know?
Right.
But yeah, no, my big concern was exactly that is if I 100% understand and respect and actually like his move because we don't think he's going to actually be president this time. It's just kind of a fact we have to deal with. So, of course, I want him to buddy back up to Trump, get somehow in the cabinet in a position that we know he can affect change and whatever that looks like. And we've talked about that before. It'll be cool to see what happens. I'm optimistic about that. But the one thing I would be concerned about if Trump is now somehow removed and then we're what left with Nikki Haley or I guess DeSantis if he doesn't actually suspend his campaign, even though kind of seems like maybe that's what he's going to do, though they're not really admitting it. So I don't.
Right.
That's what kind of scares me about it. Is I feel like you could have had a backdoor agreement between Trump and Vivek that said, "Hey, I'm not going to officially." And this is only under the presumption that him suspending his campaign actually means he can't resume it, which is our concern. So if that was the case, if somebody there knows that that's the case, then I definitely wish he didn't officially suspend his campaign because
How you just mentioned Nikki Haley, and there is still this thing going on right now on many people talking about the intention of some of the people to put Nikki Haley instead of Trump. And just to show you how media is corrupted, mainstream media, and standing behind this idea is, so this is just today's highlights in the newspaper. This is just today. Let me read you some. So, current headlines promoting Nikki. So, first headline at the Canadian Press: Trump mocks Nikki Haley's first name. It's his latest example of attacking rivals based on race. USA Today: with her candidacy online, Haley takes on Trump in New Hampshire. Christian Monitor: can Nikki Haley exploit Trump vulnerability in suburbs? Daily Beast: Judge Judy will stump for Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. The Hill: Haley gets under Trump's skin in New Hampshire. This is just a few examples just from today, how there's several headlines in media today about Trump's being evil and doing this and this, and then a bunch of headlines about Nikki. And it just makes you wonder, like, what is going on? I mean, to me, it's just such a proof of corruption on highest level that I cannot even fathom that. I don't even know what to say, really.
Yeah, I don't like. I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's it's interesting to see that. So I think the best example, other than to bring up Sarah Palin again, that I can think of is Kamala Harris. It's I don't understand the thought process behind the super PACs that funded or whoever is kind of pushing Nikki Haley along. I don't understand the logic behind pushing forward someone who is so obviously unlikable.
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying she doesn't have supporters or people that like are Nikki Haley super fans. They're gonna exist, you know. I also don't think Trump is very likable. So like I understand that what I'm saying kind of like goes both directions. But Trump has like a fanatic base that even if a huge chunk of the population doesn't like him or finds him unlikable, he is electable.
Uh-huh.
I obviously don't know enough, or I am smarter than these people because I don't understand why they would ever think Nikki Haley is that. Hillary Clinton's another one. Why didn't I think of Hillary Clinton first? How unlikable a person could you have? And with an established like air of hoity-toity unlikability and a lot of controversy around her before she even ran for president. The Clintons, there was already a lot of mystery and controversy, and you know what I mean? Like, anyway,
Uh-huh.
maybe we just don't understand the grand scheme of things, or maybe there is a shift in all of it. Maybe the things that used to work that they could predict on working, and they could look at Nikki Haley 20 years ago and see she's a perfect candidate. Well, she was a guy 20 years ago, but
Uh-huh.
you know what I mean? Like maybe anyway,
Yes.
I'm not getting to any specific answer, but man, I hope that we're right and they're the ones that are wrong, but I don't understand it. So
Yeah. Well, the good
interesting.
thing is
Well,
that we're going to chance to follow this until November. So this is going to be very interesting because things are happening every week that we don't expect, and it's making very interesting, uh, like watch. Except it doesn't really gives you much hope in anything.
yeah, yeah,
Unfortunately, it's almost like more like it wouldn't be so serious when you think about it. You know what the issues we're facing. It wouldn't be really truly so serious. It would be made, it would made for great comedy, really. Uh, but when you're really thinking about the implications, what it means for really the everybody, because United States is, like it or not, superpower right now. It's kind of makes this thing kind of like a we can easily slip from comedy to horror.
right.
Yeah.
There was a movie a couple of years ago, probably more than a couple of years ago now, but it was a really dark comedy about kind of about all the people that surrounded Stalin. And I can't remember the name of the movie or even who was in it at this point, but I just remember it being really, really good. But it was a perfect example of that. It's that it it's the kinds of things that can happen that once you can get a couple of decades to separate you from the events and you can
Uh-huh.
look back on it, it can be incredibly funny. I mean, it's disturbing and dark, you know, like it's a time period that is never going to be thought of as like the chuckle times, but a movie like that shows the kind of the layers of ludicrous comedic. I don't know how to explain what I'm saying, but yeah, it's dark, but and if we weren't living in it, it would be funny. You would look at it and say, "Wow, that's just ridiculous and funny."
Uh-huh.
But when you're living in it, you kind of can't get out of that visceral experience of this isn't
Right.
funny. Anyway,
One of the
um,
one of the
go ahead.
interesting things, I don't know how possible it is, but one of the campaign promises of Trump is that he's not going to allow that the digital currency being implemented. Um, which kind of is interesting because I think that I was reading somewhere it's now like 130 countries exploiting that possibility of having cashless society. And so it's kind of interesting that the Trump would make that promise that it's going to try to, not to have it implemented, which I would love to not be implemented, but I don't know if he can push against the whole world going that direction.
Yeah, this would actually be, and I don't know if this is just a note for us, for something that we could cover. So stop that. Um, but something that would be great for us to cover on this channel from like a let's break it down and analyze it. Um, is there's an amazing speech in Atlas Shrugged. It's effectively a speech. It's a conversation that one character is having with other characters. Francisco d'Anconia is having it and kind of laying out his view on money as a concept, especially as compared to the concept of money is the root of all evil, this old adage that's really easy to throw around and it's really easy to identify and think that there's a lot of substance and truth to it. And it's a really good conversation that I'd love to explore and then discuss about it, discuss the same concept but in a digital age. Like, what then would digital currencies to us mean? And it'd effectively be a session of listing all the reasons why, even if they exist, we would never want the government to be the one controlling digital currency. That's a terrifying idea. But
I would like to, lots of our talks, is being focused on, the amount of corruption that exists in the current system at every level, like from business to governments to countries. And when you really, think about it, it is very toxic. It is very sad to see the scope of it, and makes you wonder, okay, how do you keep your hope? And how do you keep not just your hope, but how do you keep your existence, your financial, your emotional well-being, your relationship in such challenging times when the people are divided over so many issues, and when people are pushed financially so hard as they push now. Not everybody, because I just had a discussion with somebody that I really like, and she pointed out that things are going really well for the grocery workers, because they used to be paid $13 per hour. Now they paid $18 per hour. So, I'm thinking,
is that where the conversation ended?
well,
did they have any deeper insights other than being able to just say they're making $5 more an hour?
Yeah, so things going really good for them, because
they're making $5 more an hour.
Because they had a huge pay increase. So I'm just showing you. It was kind of just like try to just sometimes the people have a perspective that are very hard to agree, or this kind of thinking, wow, are they really serious? But how do you in all this, what's going on, how do you keep your mind focused and clear, and despite all this challenging, you work on a goal to better yourself and hopefully better things around you too? And I think it's a big challenge, and I think that some days it feels okay, some days it feels like, wow, I don't know if I can even make it to the next day. So I don't know if and I don't know if we can use this for recording or not, somehow to
I just didn't know an exact reaction right away, but it's a profound thing to think about, and I just don't know.
Well, speak out of your guts. What first really comes for you? Don't use your head. Go really below your head a little bit to your to how you feel about it, without just make it logical. Just really like put some feelings behind that.
I don't think we're doing well, so I don't know how. I don't have anything constructive to say, because I don't think I'm doing any of that well. That's kind of
short answer.
I short of maybe spending some time to see what kind of behavioral psychological research was done in like the 30s and 40s to see how people were suffering and coping with the extreme swings in your purchasing power and your security and the sustainability of your job and everything in the you know in the transition between the roaring 20s and the dust bowl that was the 30s. um
It's
but
very,
it's like
it's very different because those were the times when people still lived more as a community. They were not as divided, like kind of isolated like now, like by now, like by social media. So I think that there was lots of help that people tried to kind of extend support to each other at the times. Now, I wonder how we do it now when we are so isolated. So people are by social media that people don't really interact with people around them, don't have the support circle, the way they used to have. When the harsh times really come, even worse than they are now, how people are going to cope? Because
right.
think about your situation. Most people, we are really became very isolated in terms of support. Like, I think that that's where I kind of see. Be honest with you, the only thing it's kind of interesting that and sad maybe in some ways that the biggest support that I see for each other are not even like in the churches and stuff, because churches became very uh, interesting way they are conducted. People go in, they sing a little bit, then they pastor does some kind of presentation. People hug each other, thinking, oh, this is so great. Then they rush out of the door, and 5 minutes later, they already don't even think about or act like anything, with that. But the most interesting support that I see is happening in places like AA meetings, when people really gather and they share their thoughts, they express support each other, they even do help each other. It's just a different mindset. It's like a community.
Yeah.
And
I wonder, just to to bring this to a conversation kind of more in line with what maybe we would aim to have in the future, is let's look at that in like a bigger picture. So what's happened since the 20s and 30s that has made it so Americans, and we'll just generalize with Americans because that's kind of the culture that we're discussing, um, arguably Western culture, but let's focus on America because America. What has changed? How could we be facing arguably a very similar situation with this tumultuous economy and unknown presence of wars around the world that seem to be escalating, and it's very reminiscent of what was happening in the 20s and 30s. But then we would argue that there was still kind of some semblance of community. And I think there's been a lot of propaganda since that time in America that's made it difficult for Americans to differentiate political ideology from a sense of community, because the entire 20th century of America has been so anti-collectivist, rightfully so. And when we're talking anti-collectivist, we're saying like anti-socialism, anti-fascism, anti-communism. And I wonder if there's a disconnect when that's the like political will of an entire community, that people are somehow conflating that idea with a sense of community. Like, can we elevate the idea of the individual so much and instill that as like a dogmatic belief in Western culture to the point where we're sacrificing our sense of community? Does that make sense? I think I made it make less sense with that last statement. But
I, why didn't get it?
why don't so there's nothing inherent about the nuclear family to me that says I shouldn't know who my neighbors are. Those aren't mutually inclusive things, right? So uh, the idea that the nuclear family or the importance of focusing on the individual and individual rights in Western culture, or particularly in the United States, it shouldn't come automatically, or with that shouldn't automatically come at like a deterioration of the sense of community. I don't. Jake, is that making sense?
No, not quite yet.
No. Okay.
Try
All
differentiate.
right. Take a step back. Let's take a step back. In the 20s and 30s, we would argue, I think, based on our previous conversation, that there seemed to have been a greater sense of community than there is now. Why do you think that is?
Well, there was no other ways to really interact than mostly in person or by mail. And so I think that's what people used to do. And it was just not that far back. I grew up in a community. And, we have a long street of houses. I don't know, maybe 30, 40 houses just on our street. And everybody knew everybody. And you would go next door to, oh, I ran out of the milk or butter. I go next door to get a butter. Or one neighbor would start building or fixing his house, and all the neighbors would come and, without paying, they would just come and help, build that person the house. They would watch each other children, or, or kind of watch over them when they played outside. It was when people get sick, they would help each other. They shared many of them had a gardens when they grew stuff, and they would share without paying, they would just share their produce. It was, and even beyond our street, you knew most of the people in our part of the town, and people would have different events, from funerals to different festivals to different things, and people somehow felt like you're part of something that was not perfect by any means. There were, like, of course, there's still people, that had an issue with drinking. People still had an issue with all sorts of, stuff that you let everybody else. But somehow lots of it got handled in the community, but it felt like support. Now,
right,
I'm living in a situation where I don't even know neighbor next door and barely say hi to them. And actually, I feel one of the things that I noticed lately is I miss that part, because suddenly it feels very lonely and isolated. And I never thought it would really be an issue for me, because I was always distracted with, learning this, working, doing this. But more and more I'm realizing I'm missing that sense of community when you play together, you mourn together, you have helping each other, achieve it, different goals. It's just
right.
it's more important than I ever thought in our human lives to be like that. But especially in North America, I see the most than any other country I've been to, that somehow they totally broke apart. It doesn't hardly exist.
Right. To kind of like, because I think I really like where this conversation is going, but I have to be the devil's advocate here, and I just want to present what I think is an obstacle to us accomplishing that in modern era that maybe people are kind of taking for granted. And that would be, so I'm going to caveat that with this question. Peter, do you remember when you're thinking about that community that you had when you were young, um, in Czechoslovakia, and you knew everybody on the street? When you were in that community when you were young, um, how did you guys treat gypsies?
How we would treat them? We would be um, very cautious of them, but I actually one of the um, gypsy person that I met because she was my friend. We end up like he was going with me to the school, and we became quite a good friends, but on personal basis. But as a, for example, I remember the time when I went so excited. I don't know, 16-year-old or 15-year-old with my friend. We wanted to go to dance. So we come to the dance place, and at the cash register, there is several gypsies. They take our money and beat us up. So we never made it to dance. So uh, there was, they are different culture. They really behave differently. They try to assimilate them. They, for example, would give them in Czech Republic way back then free apartments and move them into apartments just for them to destroy those apartments, totally destroy them, um,
Okay,
and not really.
and without without like, so the reason I brought it up, and I think we could explore another time your experiences then, but I think every culture kind of has that. They have in Europe, it's easy to identify gypsies as this kind of like outsider group because they literally are that. So it's a very convenient example to bring up in Europe. But I think everywhere tends to kind of have that disconnect. You have an amazing sense of community, and then you have a cultural group that kind of doesn't quite gel, and that becomes an obstacle. And the only reason I'm bringing that up isn't to kind of like point at Czechs back in the 60s and 70s and pretend you're bad people because you couldn't get along with gypsies. It's a natural it's a natural obstacle. And I think what we with globalism and kind of how that spread into the 21st century, I think it's really, really easy for all of us to forget that that is an obstacle in a sense of community. And we are more multicultural, which there's all kinds of reasons why that's a great thing. And we could argue till the cows come home that that's good in some ways. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't make other things more difficult. It doesn't make them impossible. I really hope it doesn't make them impossible, right? I hope we can develop a sense of community, but I just think that's relevant to bring up is that what you had in the 20s and 30s and 40s is an easier ability to devise a sense of community because you have a more automatic sense of cohesion among the group of people. Since then, and as again, I'm not saying that it's the immigration or any of that stuff that's the problem. And I'm not even talking about illegal immigration right now. I'm just talking about the fact that we now live in a world where people are able, you're physically able to move all over the place. You should have the right to maintain different aspects of your culture and to decline assimilating other aspects of other people's culture. That's what I believe that individualism is all about. But inherently, that provides an obstacle to this other thing, which is we would all hopefully want, Prometheus, leave it. We would all hopefully want to be able to derive a sense of community. And I just think that's more difficult today because it's more difficult to just look at the people around you and have one thing that unites you all. Right? And I'm saying that also knowing that I think so, like, one of the most disgusting and primitive and least intellectual forms of collectivism is racism. And the idea that one group is going to be better than any other group simply because of characteristics that you were born with. And it frustrates me that those same characteristics are the easiest ones to look at a group of people and identify with. So we kind of have just bringing up the devil inside everyone's head.
When you talk about community, something came to me when you were talking about maybe it's related to a little bit to what you were trying to say, is it's different if the community decide on things that would be beneficial to them and the government decide. And one of the biggest example of that is Sweden. The government of Sweden decided they're going to import 500,000 people from Middle East, Syria, and those countries. Sweden has only like 4 million people. So 500,000 of, bring people in quickly like that totally change the makeup of the country. Now this group is creating havoc in Sweden with crime, offenses, burden on a social system. And Sweden is just burning up. Just latest example of the kind of weird thing that happened is they were protesting recently against some kind of Quran, burning or something, and injured bunch of police officers, some of them serious. One of the latest incidents is, they protested again against whatever's happening somewhere in Middle East. During the protest, they attack police officers, because they come from very violent culture. We are pacified here. They are not. They are war-torn country in the Middle East. They've been in war for as long as they can remember. They are harsh people. They're very different than us in the way they, approach things. And so they injure a bunch of police officers, some of them seriously. And now, for some reason, the judge, and I could not quite understand the law, I was trying to read, I could not understand it, decided that even though they imprisoned those guys, police officers are personally responsible for something that they did, and they have to pay hefty fines out of their own pockets to those Syrians. And police officers are baffled why they have to, they protesting that. So you're creating those totally strange thing that the government, is not a community to decide to do something like that, which totally, changed the makeup of the community. The community had no say in that. And then, of course, it creates racism. And this is happening in Germany, because Germany also importing the huge amount of people from Middle East. You see changes happening in Canada. I mean, last time when I visited, that felt like, wow, am I in Canada or am I in Middle East? What's happening here? And it's happening in the United States when we have, 300,000 illegals crossing a month. And what the havoc it's creating on the whole country. And again, nobody asked community about that. The government's doing anything about it. So that's what I'm trying to say. If the community would have the say, they would not make those decisions. It's the government that seem to be either ignoring or pushing people into those situations, creating those problems, and of course fueling the racism and all these things because people didn't want it in their communities.
So what you're getting at is along the lines of what I was trying to get at earlier when I was discussing all of the propaganda, and I say this as propaganda because I think I believe it was largely misunderstood, is that throughout the 30s and 40s, and then throughout the entirety of the Cold War, and then even after we would consider the Cold War ended, there's been a long-standing concept of like anti-collectivism. Now, we kind of, thanks to Bernie, a large chunk of Americans don't include socialism there because they don't understand it. But there's been a lot of anti-fascism, anti-communism rhetoric. And what I was getting at is that I think then Americans kind of culturally interpreted any kind of grouping of individuals as a bad thing. So that's kind of what I was getting, and I wonder how much of that perpetuated the kind of degradation of this idea of community in the United States, because we kept talking about how bad communism is, and how bad these concepts like solidarity that would be like usurped by these communist movements that are really just talking about a cohesive sense of community, but they are used in propaganda to promote communism, and then the opposite is used to show the Red Scare. And then I just wonder culturally how much of Americans were so kind of like pushed back and closed in on themselves because of this fear of collectivism, when that was what you mentioned is a perfect, like, collectivism is describing a political ideology, a political organization of people. It is not discussing, when we're talking about collectivism in a political definition, it's not discussing any social grouping of people where we voluntarily come together and we kind of associate with each other. We fight for our community and for what we believe in and those kinds of things. That's an entirely separate conversation. But then you brought up psychologically isolating social media and modern technology can be as well. And I don't think that has a less of an impact. I'm just curious like how much that kind of stuff really affected the American psyche and has rendered us incapable of developing community attachments, because we can't see our neighbors as somebody that has something similar to us.
Right.
And then to just mention what you said about these other countries that are now experiencing this massive obstacle. Sweden, you can think of England, the same thing. Like for years and years and years, it was easy for England to think of a very cohesive cultural identity. And now, they banned carrying knives because you have cultures that show up and just behave so differently that the landscape of Britain has changed so drastically in the last 100 years.
Which if you
they're now facing.
But interesting thing, you mentioned England. I was just thinking a few days ago how kind of nuts it is in England. So I was watching some kind of show, like a detective show. I think it was called Fool Me Once, name of it. And the main character was not police officer, but there was a police officers involved in that show. Okay, you're talking about modern England. So you have the police officers that go to conduct their duties, and they have no arms. Not any arm whatsoever. They're not allowed to carry any arms. And several times they end up in situations when their life was threatened and they have no way to defend themselves. And I'm thinking...
I'm sorry. I literally was thinking you were describing a police officer that did not have any arms.
Oh, okay.
So it took me a second to understand what you meant.
Weapons. Okay. Didn't have any weapons to defend or defend themselves or restrict the people that were criminals. They didn't have that, and I'm thinking, what happened? There was like that some of those, that utopia that you hear about, that somehow you go and you try to convince how they try to do it in the States too, to disarm or defund police and replace police officers with social workers. Well, good luck with those social workers to be able to help or enforce anything. You know what I mean? It's just insanity to think that somebody that needs to enforce the law, they have no weapons to enforce it or defend themselves. It shocked me, to be honest with you. Totally shocked me that.
So this was the first time you were exposed to the concept that British bobbies don't have guns?
Well, they were not bobbies. I don't even understand. Yeah, I don't even understand about bobbies, but they were, police officer investigating murders and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, so like a detective and
Detectives,
stuff. Okay.
They should be.
So you knew like the general beat cops and stuff didn't have them, but you assumed that. Yeah. So just to put it out there are police officers in England that do have weapons.
Of course,
It would be
yes.
like our
Special
SWAT
forces,
team.
yeah.
Exactly. So like there are instances because they recognize that yeah, you can disarm all of the cops, but you're not going to disarm criminals. If a criminal wants to get its hands on some guns, they're going to do it. They still have homicides related to firearms in England, even though they've completely removed the legal ability for British citizens to kind of get their hands on these guns. And a lot of people will look at the like knife violence, the uptick in knife violence in the UK as uh, as something kind of like I don't know really where I'm going with it. I just find it amusing that you have people who will point at knife crime in the UK, or maybe they're ignoring knife crime in the UK and trying to justify that police don't need to have weapons. But then if you look at the statistics about the number of incidents with knives in the UK, all it really does is tell you that criminals know they don't need to get a gun in order to commit assaults and robberies and those kinds of things because the people they're going up against aren't going to have guns. So you're just lowering the barrier to entry into criminal activity is what they've done by removing both the general population's ability to have it and certainly the police's ability to have firearms to combat criminals. Criminals you don't see that kind of knife crime where the intention is robbery in the United States. Because people in the United States that want to commit a robbery are very aware that if the people they're robbing don't have weapons, the police officers responding certainly will. And by weapons, I mean firearms. So the barrier to entry into criminal activity in the United States effectively becomes a firearm, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because but in the UK, you now have poor migrants coming in who have very little opportunity, no money, and are resorting to criminal activity and don't even need to save up enough money to buy a gun because all of their victims and the people who are supposed to respond to those victims don't even have a knife. Like you're not even legally allowed to carry a knife around in the UK. So normal people don't have them. So you can carry a kitchen knife around and you are the most armed person on the street. So the barrier to entry is significantly lower. And then you see crimes in the UK that get perpetrated. Like 2 or 3 people will perpetrate an entire crime in the UK with a moped and a knife.
Yeah, right. Yeah, seem to be the way choice.
So that's all I'm getting. And I don't understand. Anyway.
No, just
craziness.
So yeah, I just found it interesting. That movie just really shocked me to watch that. Not was a movie, it was a series. And talking about the community, I really enjoy. I never thought I would, but I came across the show on Netflix called Loudermilk, and it's just series. It's a comedy about a group of people. It's about actually kind of like AA group, and they're kind of their leader, but it's just insane. If you get a chance, please, take some time and watch it. I think you will really enjoy. Haven't laughed in a long time, but also there was that sense of community showing up through that show big time, and different aspects of it. So it was kind of interesting to watch for that reason too.
I've seen the listing on Netflix, but we haven't watched it yet.
Yeah,
so
try it because the community is big part of it, but also has really. They very much reminded me of the guys what you tried to do with the Greg,
Oh, Dave and Greg.
Yeah, that was like so much along those lines. And except much bigger production and many people involved because of course they could afford it somehow. I don't know where they got financing. It was actually quite big production and good quality, but it was very much kind of what you try to accomplish with your production. So I think you really would get that if you would watch it. So if you have a chance, please watch it. So and we can share some, thoughts about that. Yeah, it's the so we know we touched on several subjects, but that the part of is what we would be nice if we could find ways when we talk about those issues um, to kind of be able to come up with some kind of way to give people hope that there might be a better way for going forward. Because right now it's very hard, for most people that are anyway conscious um, to function in today's society, especially in America. I'm finding it very difficult because you don't have a support systems here, like in any kind of any way, um, or if you have those systems, they are very broken, and and because of that, people are struggling, and you see it in the amount of mental illness, you see the amount of addiction problems, crime in United States. Like United States consumes like 10 times or something like a huge number more of antidepressants and anxiety medications than any other
Antipsychotic.
country is, or a whole world combined. I think they take more the United States. And there's just the legal drugs, talking about even the illegal drugs,
Yeah.
So uh, I think the United States consumes something like 25% of all world illegal drugs. I was reading somewhere. And we talk about only like 300 million people in the United States living. So yes, it's um, very difficult living in here right now for people. And when you get to talk to those people, it's all about quality of life that we seem to somehow not able to provide um, for people enough economic opportunities and freedom for them to have that. And maybe that's part of the problem is that, as we talk about it, government took so much control of everything that they took away from people way to have better economic prosperity because they kind of left it now in the hands of few corporations and franchises, and small business people almost disappeared now or independent business people almost disappearing in United States as a result of that, which kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of modern slavery.
Or the statistics for the number of small business owners that work a second job is frightening. Like,
Yes.
and that's indicative of
Mhm.
of a kind of a shift, that makes entrepreneurial success even more difficult. Is, if you don't break out in the first 6 months, then you might as well have a second job and
Right.
struggle to keep your business open for the entirety.
Well, let's just finish for today with our thoughts, and we will see what we're going to come up with next time.
And he's asleep. Like I can almost always count on him helping us segue the exit of the podcast. And he's just sleeping over there. So for anybody who's still listening to this, we appreciate you tuning into the latest podcast. For anybody who used this to fall asleep, just please recommend this to other people who are insomniacs. And Prometheus, although he's asleep, would like to say goodbye, and we'll see you next week. Any parting words, Peter?
Yes, see you next time.